Good morning, everyone. I'm joined today by special correspondent Pedro, who's a very good kitty and has been reporting on the recent delays in food causing temporary several-hour famines, the loss of toys under the couch, and the need for more cuddles and snuggles. So he's going to be sitting on my lap, helping me with the news, providing, and you know, if I have any questions and I need to ask him about anything, I'll be sure to ask him. He is a little bit to my right. He's a bit of an authoritarian nationalist. So I won't ask him for his opinion about any political things because I think he is probably not the kind of character whose political opinions I need to give a platform to. Oh, do you see something? Do you need to get something? I think he sees something, so I don't know how much longer he's going to stay in this broadcast. But Pedro, everyone, Pedro, he's a good boy. He's a very good kitty, although honestly, I think his politics are a little bit out there. Recently, my neighbor and I spoke with each other, and he was very upset because I was almost letting an outsider into the house. That's what I mean by authoritarian nationalist. He then proceeded to harass me by biting my feet the whole way back. Sorry for that whole opening of this news broadcast opening with cute kitty videos, or cute kitty stories, but it's Monday. What you gonna do? You gonna sue me? Yeah, I didn't think so. I can't afford a lawyer. You can't afford a lawyer. Let's be real. Colorado Springs Mutual Aid and Solidarity Union is the organization that I'm working with while I do this, so I will boost a little bit of what they're doing right now. They are doing they're doing, as usual, a weekly distribution for supplies for the houseless community in Colorado Springs. The police are doing 2 sweeps pretty much every week in southern Colorado Springs and trying to kind of clear the way for gentrification and development in that area. That there's been a lot of planned expansion of businesses, investment in that area that is going to start pushing out not just houseless people, but poorer people that have lived in that area for quite some time. So it is, what we're doing is trying to provide direct aid and assistance to the community, to reach them wherever they are, to hear their needs directly, to express solidarity with them, and to start organizing in order to have like a self-advocacy and self-empowerment for the community directly. So instead of charity, what we're trying to do is to promote solidarity there. So if you'd like to support us, you can go into the description, find our Venmo, CashApp, Patreon, and all that stuff. And you can also consider stopping by our donation drop-off, which is at America the Beautiful Park, every Thursday from 5 to 7 p.m., or come by our distribution at Dorchester Park at 12:45 p.m. In other Colorado Springs related news, Southwest Airlines is launching 5 new daily flights from the Colorado Springs Airport to Denver, Chicago Midway, Dallas Love Field, and Phoenix and Las Vegas. That's exciting for me. I don't know if it's as exciting for y'all, but the flights looked affordable. Like the one up to Denver is like $29 or something. So I am, as I said in a previous broadcast, sort of too into transit. I'm kind of a nerd about transit, and so I think it's interesting that they're going to expand that airport and then expand the number of flights. One is going to and the fact that there'll be kind of a regular connection back and forth between Dallas and between Chicago will be convenient for anyone in Colorado Springs when we're allowed to travel who's interested in getting out. Colorado Springs is also swearing in a new fire chief named Randy Royal, who in an alternate timeline runs a small used car dealership in La Junta, where Randy Royal treats you like royalty, gives you royal deals. Bad joke. He has worked in emergency services for 42 years, 28 of those were as a paramedic. Chief Royal served in a chief officer role for 16 years as battalion chief, shift commander, and deputy chief. One thing that we voted on actually at some of the first General Assemblies we did this summer was promoting the fire department's homeless outreach program, which is separate from the homeless outreach team that the police department does. The homeless outreach program is with the, what is their name again? I think they're called the CARES team. And they go out, actually build relationships with people, help meet their needs, and don't ticket them, which makes them a lot more popular and a lot more welcome when they go into communities. And so I think that's, I think the fire department is one of the things I don't necessarily want to defund. So that's, yeah, okay. After a months-long labor dispute with musicians, the Colorado Springs Philharmonic says that they are ending their contract with the Musicians Union, saying that they're unable to meet their demands for better pay. That's very sad. I think it's kind of speaks to the attitude we have in our city towards unions, but also towards the arts, because we're having so much trouble making ends meet that they also couldn't really meet the musicians' needs. And yeah. In some news that's kind of related to news in Colorado Springs with the sweeps that they've been doing in the homeless camps, there was a fire at a homeless camp underneath I-35 in Austin, which damaged the underside of the interstate. And that kind of highlights that there's been a lot of tension in the city between the local and the state officials about what to do, because the state wants them to reinstate their camping ban. The city has been resistant to that. They've tried to house people in a old motel, but that's being met with protests by NIMBYs, the not in my backyard type folks who do not want any kind of, affordable housing or anything in their neighborhood, period. So there's been resistance to that. According to Axios was reporting that other cities have been doing that, have been using old hotels and apartment buildings in North Carolina and Minneapolis, building tiny home villages, which is something that they've tried in Denver. In Denver, they've also been trying to use unarmed volunteers and social workers to help clear camps, which is another thing that's like positive because it's no longer being police, but also the fact that they're clearing the camps, I guess, has more to do with the sense of like health concerns with COVID, maybe like rodent infestations, but if they have somewhere for them to go, that's the thing. Is like if they have a housing option for them to go, that's not going to be this sort of authoritarian pseudo prison like system like they have at Springs Rescue Mission. It'd be good. Like I had said earlier, the police are continuing to do these sweeps, and they're pushing people off of the main trails into less easily noticed parts of the city, which is just making the problem harder for people to see. But it's not making it go away. There's still hundreds of people out there dealing with exposure to the elements, dealing with food insecurity, dealing with lack of access to healthcare, lack of access to the equipment that they need in order to be safe from the pandemic. So one thing they've been doing in Denver too that I saw was they had made a safe parking area where you're allowed to park. Easily could do that at Dorchester Park. Honestly, like if they would just put back in lights, you could easily do that in Dorchester Park. Dorchester Park would be a really easy spot to have like some social workers. You could unchain the fucking gazebo that they blocked off. Anyway, moving towards national news, it is International Women's Day, so Biden ordered a review of previous Title IX restrictions put in place by Betsy DeVos. He's not overturning them outright, he's just reviewing them. He's also established a gender policy council led by former ambassador to Uruguay, Julissa Reynoso, and former advisor to Hillary Clinton, Jennifer Klein. They are directed to, quote, address gender in policies, programs, and budgets, end quote, and to produce an annual report measuring the strategy's progress. The council will also include a special assistant to the president and senior advisor on gender-based violence to, quote, prevent and respond to gender-based violence wherever it occurs. End quote. This has been a pattern that I've noticed with Biden's executive orders, and I know that the right-wing media will tell you that these executive orders are basically like communism, but they're very technocratic and very centralized and very slow. So it's like reviewing policies, reviewing potential changes. The experts are in charge. We are going to try to figure out a course of action from the White House, and then it will slowly trickle down to you by working through whatever community leaders we have identified will be most likely to reach you. And so it's this very like corporatist model of governance, which idealizes this sort of central paternalistic executive branch that will gradually just like diffuse good policy through the rest of the country and educate you towards the right way to do things. Whereas, if we were going to say like have a anarcho-communist revolution, we wouldn't want to be having this kind of centralized state top-down thing. We would want grassroots initiatives and grassroots like ground level participation from people in their own liberation. So like this idea that women's liberation is going to come because we put like two experts in charge of a gender council is not true. Like women's liberation is going to come from like women organizing on the ground and getting like militant and doing direct action type stuff. It's not going to come from Julissa Reynoso, who I'm sure is a good intentioned former ambassador to Uruguay. But yeah, that's what I've noticed, period, with all of his stuff, is that there's this very like paternalistic, state-centric, top-down approach to everything, and there's not as much participation at the grassroots level. That he's not trying to stimulate that kind of participation. And Fox News was criticizing him for this yesterday in like these very, very, very like hysterical terms about like, he's been so quiet, what is he doing? No one knows where he is, which isn't true. I mean, like, we know where he is. He like talks all the time. He just does these like really boring speeches, but he is kind of like not communicating a ton. Like there's not this sense of like there's not this sense. I mean, like so yeah, Trump had like his Trump bros who were like rallied behind him and like would like be like, yeah, we're gonna harass immigrants and stuff, and like, so Biden hasn't like tried to tap into any kind of Democratic base. He's kind of just told them to go back to eating brunch. It's kind of the thing that I've seen. And like, you see all these liberals on Twitter being like, I'm so glad I don't have to pay attention to who the Department of Homeland Security Secretary is anymore. And it's like, oh yeah, I can just disengage with politics through all of 2021 and only come back in for midterms, when there are people like starving, freezing to death without water. The mutual aid, I mean, like, the one potential role for an executive branch as we slowly dismantle the executive branch would be saying, yeah, how about you do this stuff, and how about like you take this local action, how about you do some mutual aid, how about like encouraging people to organize these sorts of service projects on a local level, and even providing resources for them to do so if they really wanted to, or just like encouraging his base to take direct action, to unionize and stuff like that. But the Democratic Party, as I'll get into, is like more in line with the kind of petty bourgeois union bureaucracy types and like the interests of the ruling class, and they try to just kind of contain and manage class conflict rather than acknowledging class conflict and taking the side of the working class. So they really aren't a working class party. They really are a party of the ruling class, just like the Republicans are a party of the ruling class. What we really need is a working class party. That was my rant. Just watching a CDC press conference while I was in the shower, I know that gives you a very good lens of what my life is like. They issued new guidelines urging increased social distancing for people who've already been vaccinated, highlighting the fact that vaccines are not completely effective. They're highlighting new antiretroviral drugs that act on the RNA transcriptase mechanisms in the cells, and they seem fairly promising as far as therapeutics go. In a press conference, the CDC was noticing that vaccination rates for communities of color remain low due to historic distrust, and they're prioritizing their communities in vaccine outreach and distribution. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has announced that he plans to take matters into his own hands and surge police and National Guard personnel to the U.S.-Mexico border in what he calls Operation Lone Star. The surge personnel will include air, ground, marine, and tactical border security assets. Abbott has tried to say part of this has to do with the desire to prevent the spread of COVID, because he's saying, the migrants are carrying over COVID across the border. But he literally just lifted all the COVID restrictions and is refusing federal assistance for help with testing. So he's just kind of using that fear, the idea of COVID as this politically correct way of saying that he's afraid of dirty immigrants coming. He's afraid of the dirtiness and this fear of contamination, which is very typical right-wing nationalist type logic. And this militant policing on the border, I can't help but imagine, is going to result in violence and people getting hurt and people getting traumatized, in unnecessary levels of attacks against migrant families who are seeking asylum, and clashes between ultimately the state and federal government, if not violent clashes, at least passive clashes that make Governor Abbott's dick hard. NBC also reported, so this is also kind of undermines his concern about the migrants with COVID. 6.3% of the migrants that were tested had coronavirus, which is actually smaller than the positivity rate statewide, where an average of 8.3 tests came back positive over the past 7 days. I don't know if that's within standard deviation way, but it's fairly lower rates of COVID from these migrants, and so that's not as much of a concern as you'd think. And if he really cared about that, he would probably keep in place at least some COVID safety measures. So it's 108 tests that tested positive. It's a small share of the 3,800 tests in Cameron County where those tests were carried out since January 25th. Another COVID-related news, the ports in Oakland and Los Angeles remain backed up with ships forced to anchor in harbors due to a lack of dock workers, many of whom have been infected or exposed to COVID. About 30,000 containers are waiting to be unloaded, which is costing multinational corporations millions of dollars every day that it happens. Workers have called for companies to test all of their employees and only allow those who test negative to return, rather than to maintain the bare minimum safety standards. They recognize their role as essential workers who maintain the flow of the global economy. Haven't talked about going on strike yet, but are definitely demanding better and more stringent measures in order to keep them safe on the job, because there's been a lot of deaths among dock workers, and they're very vulnerable to and their vulnerabilities to the dock workers affect every single person in the United States because we're so dependent on international trade right now. 1,000 workers at Allegheny Technologies in Brackenridge, Pennsylvania, represented by the United Steelworkers, voted nearly unanimously to go on strike. World Socialist website reports that Allegheny Technologies has proposed a 4-year contract that will cut workers' wages, overtime pay, and health insurance, make scheduling worse for workers, and expand the use of contract labor. Workers at the Brackenridge facility have not had their wages increased since 2014, over half a decade according to the union, and workers are also threatened with layoffs. ATI plans to eliminate up to 200 jobs in the Alakiski region by the end of the year and close the melt shop at the Brackenridge facility. Apparently this kind of thing has happened before with the United Steelworkers, according to the WSWS. Their leaders will have voted in the past to authorize strikes as a way to gain leverage over the employer that they're negotiating with. They'll isolate the workers from contacts with international unions, with other unions, and ultimately they settle for conciliatory deals with the management without following through on those promises of strikes. They're very connected to the mainstream political establishment. They end up coordinating really with bosses, the union bureaucracies, to contain working class struggle and to keep it from spreading. WSWS pointed the workers to the example of the Pennsylvania Educators Rank and File Safety Committee, where teachers formed an independent structure outside the control of the unions and the Democratic Party to democratically draft their own demands based on what the workers need and not what the corporations say is affordable, end quote. So I would look at for everyone's benefit, look at the rank and file safety committees that were proposed by the Pennsylvania educators. The WSWS is pointing people to that. They were pointing the dock workers to that. So check it out. United States Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is pushing for a UN-led peace process in Afghanistan, reports the BBC. He sent. I'm gonna shake my foot, so I'm stopping shaking my hands, so you don't think I'm stimming as much as I actually am. He sent a letter to Afghani President Ashraf Ghani calling for a 90-day reduction in violence and a transitional government formed between both sides. As the U.S. begins to draw back their troop levels in Afghanistan and facilitate talks between the Taliban and Afghani government officials, they are warning of a possible spring offensive by the Taliban, which could allow them to make major gains. There's been a lot of suspicion on the part of the Taliban that they'll use the kind of drawbacks of U.S. troops in order to regain power. There's been a lot of concern among women's groups about what will happen. I have been watching this since, I was, in elementary school, and it is insane to think that there are people who might be deployed to Afghanistan today who are not old enough to remember the start of the war and who were not alive at the time of 9/11. So, just insane. It's just insane how long we've been there. It's a huge quagmire, and it's taking us forever to pull out. The risk with kind of rushing the peace process is the fact that it could spiral out of control again. But also, should we really be trying to police and maintain try to hold together the Afghani government? It's one of those trolley problems where it's do you pull this switch even though the switch is evil? I don't know. I honestly, on this kind of stuff, I'm I don't like the idea of the Taliban going back in power. But the peace process, I just hope the peace process goes well and that this does not blow up. That's what I hope. The general strike has begun in Myanmar, with 18 labor organizations coordinating to shut down factories and construction until democracy is restored. The military, in contravention of international law, continues to occupy hospitals and universities. And they explained this in an article shared in their not at all dystopian website, Global New Light Myanmar, saying, quote, "Most people who do not want to see instability in the country have called the hotlines in their respective regions and states and requested to control the public universities and hospitals and to take action effectively for the benefit of the people." So they're saying that, and then Al Jazeera is reporting hospital workers are oh my god, hey, can you soldiers get out of here? We have a lot of people that you just shot that we need to help. And they're no. The Global New Light Myanmar website, as the dystopian name implies, is very spooky, and it's very ominous because it's what you see from a military government that's just trying very hard to make you think it's not an evil monstrosity. Yeah, I would highly recommend, if you need to have nightmares, just looking at the way that they report on the rioters have tried to convince the media that they are peaceful protesters, but they're really troublemakers trying to undermine the security of the state. It's very ominous. But yeah, about 1,472 people remain in custody. An unknown number have been shot by the government. I say unknown because last I checked, it was 38 had been shot last week, and there have been continual shootings. There have been these late night raids. There have been stun grenades. There have been these internet shutdowns. It's escalating, and hopefully this general strike puts pressure on the Myanmar government. Solidarity with Myanmar, that the people are going on strike. A series of explosions rocked Equatorial Guinea yesterday, leaving about 20 people dead and 600 people injured. Now, this is a weird story because Equatorial Guinea, for those of you who don't know, is a former Spanish colony. Its president Ngama, the first Ngama, after Equatorial Guinea gained its independence, was a very brutal dictator who massacred many of his political opponents in like some very cartoonishly evil ways, and very known for like being very psychopathic. His son is now in charge of Equatorial Guinea as one of the longest serving non-royalty presidents in the world. He's been very repressive. Their country continues to rank lowest on press freedoms. It's a very oligarchic state where they extract a lot of oil revenue, but then that mainly stays in the hands of the ruling family and like their close associates. So President Ngama blamed the explosion on the quote negligent handling of dynamite, end quote, although others pointed to a nearby field burning. And then some other sources were saying that there was an issue with some ammunition that was in storage. So I could see all those things being true, that there was just negligent handling of dynamite near a burning field, and it happened to cause a chain reaction with an ammunition storage thing. But I could also see this being like, oh, there was an internal dispute and there was like a bombing, and now President Ngama is blaming it on the negligent handling of dynamite. It's strange, and it's a lot of people injured and a lot of people killed. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Senegalese opposition leader Ousmane Sonko was indicted for rape and released from prison. Oh, and on that, I just kind of felt like it's a good point, because Equatorial Guinea is not in the news that much, to just kind of shine a little flashlight at how fucked up President Ngama is and how repressive Equatorial Guinea is, because always nice to raise awareness about evil dictators. Senegalese opposition leader Ousmane Sonko was indicted for rape and released from prison after a protest swept across the country. So he was released, and Nicholas Hawke with Al Jazeera reported that the atmosphere was quote, the atmosphere is electric and protests have turned to celebration. There is a sense among these protesters that they were able to release Sonko themselves, that they challenged the power of the presidency, and they see his release as their personal victory. As I mentioned before, Sonko is known for being this anti-corruption figure, and so supporting Sonko is seen as this way of supporting, in a sense, like this movement against extortion and tax fraud in Senegal, and corruption. But at the same time, like, the fact he was accused of raping a beauty salon employee. And so this whole leader worship thing is like, yeah, maybe someone has a good idea, but if we're going to put all of our faith in like one leader, and like the real energy should be these people that are rising up, that recognize that there's a problem in their country and that they need to change stuff and overthrow this kind of neoliberal order. And it should be them, and they should not be trying to just look to this one leader in order to kind of guide them or like win an election and make everything better, because chances are a lot of these leaders who just use populist rhetoric just kind of rely on their people as a shield. They rely on their supporters as a shield and just count on them getting violent when they need to take charge. And so what I can see happening here is like, now they've recognized, hey, or at least Ousmane Sonko probably has recognized, like, hey, I have supporters who will tear up the country if they think that I've been wronged. And he probably can also see in the United States, President Trump almost like had hundreds of his supporters storm the Capitol on January 6th. So that's the kind of thing where I would keep an eye on this, because the next time Sonko runs for president, what's going to happen? Although I do think it's important to have solidarity with Senegal and with the people there and with their struggle against corruption and the oligarchy there. Turnout was low in legislative elections in Ivory Coast. also called Cote d'Ivoire on maps. If you look at your map, it is bordered by Ghana, south of Mali and Burkina Faso, and east of Liberia or Sierra Leone. I think it's Liberia. It should be Liberia. I don't remember. Oh, and it might be bordered by Guinea-Conakry too. I think it's like Liberia, and then like Guinea-Conakry's over here, and then like Sierra Leone's like oval shaped, like circle shaped. It's my African map, just so you know where it is. Both the center-right Democratic Party and the center-left Together for Democracy and Solidarity Party declared victory as the preliminary results came in, but official results have not been released. To a large extent, according to Al Jazeera's reporting yesterday, the races have been more about personality and how they relate to the current president of the Ivory Coast than about the actual policy, and that's indicated by the fact that the center left and the center right parties have like a ruling coalition together to compromise in order to kind of like counterweight the current president. And I haven't looked into their specific policies, but given their kind of like center orientation, it's likely that they are probably like, I'm just gonna guess that they're probably like capitalist parties. Just gonna guess. But yeah, that's all the news I've got for you today. I'm getting up to the 31-minute mark, so it's time for me to start sharing the memes. Time for me to start playing that anthem. This is a good part of the broadcast to just like sign off with other things that I thought about mentioning but didn't. Like I definitely thought about mentioning some new discoveries in quantum physics because I've always loved quantum mechanics. And when I say always, I mean like I used to hide at recess in the library in 4th grade to read encyclopedias about quantum mechanics. I used to like try to memorize like facts about subatomic particles, and like my dream was to discover new subatomic particles. And now there's new subatomic particles being discovered. There's these new mesons and hadrons that they're making with like charm quarks and like strange quarks that have like pentaquark formations and tetraquark formations. Normally, quarks operate in pairs, which is very interesting. And so every quark has a corresponding antiquark, and we don't know if quarks really exist on their own. Quarks are a mysterious thing. Quarks are very mysterious. Actually, there's this... I'm about to get into... Okay, this is cool, though. This is really cool. Okay, ready? There's this thing called isospin, where quarks... every proton and neutron is made out of... Like, proton and neutron is made out of either 2 up quarks or 2 down quarks and one of the opposite kind of quark. So... and they have this thing called isospin, so that really, like, the nucleus of an atom has a bunch of these quarks operating in, like, this kind of isospin where you can't really differentiate between the proton and the neutron. It's just this mess of quarks. And so this model of the atom that we have, where the atom's just these 2 little balls, or, like, are these balls? Like, that's not what it's like. It's like this mess of quarks. And the fact that they have these anti-quarks is just so fascinating. But there's these other exotic quarks that they found by colliding hadrons together, like the charm, like adding the charm quarks to the pentaquarks. And so that was one thing I thought about including, because it's just like interesting. There's also the Mars rover that's exploring the surface of Mars. They sent back some pictures. It's very dry. Looks very dry. Honestly, like doesn't look like a nice spot, but it's very like beautiful. I wish I could go see it. Wish I could astral project to Mars. The CIA tried to astral project to Mars. They really did. Tried to astral project to Mars 1 million BC, and they saw some crazy shit, although it was astral projection. And so, I mean, how scientific is it really? We don't know. We honestly don't know. mainstream media wants you to think remote viewing doesn't happen, but it's real. It's real. Oh yeah, and there's also the Ninja Titan dinosaur, the oldest titanosaur discovered in Argentina. Ninja Titan is its name. And I just love the fact that there's a dinosaur named Ninja Titan. So Ninja Titan and Pentaquarks. Two science stories that I didn't cover, but now that I'm thinking about it, I might cover the science stories because they're really fun. And I really like science. Oh my god. With that said, I'm going to put this video into the file and pick out some memes and go to class. So have a great day. Hope you enjoyed this news broadcast and my little tiny ramble at the end, which, yeah, it's just hard to transition into the Soviet national anthem. But I hope you enjoyed our time together. It was not my time, it was our time, comrade. Now go forth and spread the revolution!